The concept of South-South cooperation denotes the collaborative relationships between countries that come from developing countries or from the developing world, and this is based on shared understanding of what it means to collaborate in the global political economy, and to achieve mutual benefit out of that cooperation. For an example, the mechanism of IBSA Brazil and India, Brazil, and South Africa, IBSA, is one form of South-South cooperation. But as you know, this is an old concept that has evolved over time, and especially structured amongst developing countries that sought to oppose colonialism and imperial encroachment by the West. Well, South-South cooperation began really as a relationship of equals amongst countries that belonged to two continents, Africa and Asia. So it began really as an Afro-Asia political relationship. And what brought these countries together was a shared concern about the dominance of the Western powers in the international order, but also a concern about the binary nature, or the binary tensions that existed, because this was the context of the Cold War between the Soviet bloc and the Western bloc, anchored on the U.S. leadership, and this placed developing countries from Asia and Africa in an awkward position. As you know, I mean, at the time, a number of African countries were existing under the yoke of colonialism, and some were just gaining their independence. And this evolved into, that is, South-South cooperation was, I think, it crystallized more sharply in the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in 1955, where representatives from across the developing world, as well as from South Africa in the form of the African National Congress and the Transvaal Indian Congress, were present. Oliver Tambo, I think, participated in the first Bandung Conference in 1955. He was then the acting president of the African National Congress, and later on, a couple of years later, in Belgrade, when NAM, the Non-Aligned Movement, was formed in 1961, you had again Moses Kotane, who was the Secretary General of the Communist Party of South Africa, and Ahmed Kachalia of the Transvaal Indian Congress, participating as observers in that meeting, as well as a number of other African countries. I think Ghana and a few African countries participated in the Belgrade inaugural conference of NAM. It had conferences where the commitments of these countries to change the world order would be restated. Their commitment to deepen political relations amongst each other, and to oppose all forms of colonialism and all forms of imperial encroachment, until the point at which UNCTAD was formed in 1964 with the G77 group of developing countries constituting itself, essentially to challenge the unfavorable terms of trade, and to push heavily to change the structure of trade in favor of developing countries. A lot of that still exists today, even though we don't have that kind of radical activism that was a feature of G77 at the time, with people like Raoul Prebisch, who were the intellectual leading lights of this movement. And over time, and especially after the end of the Cold War, with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the demise of the Soviet bloc, it became clear that the world we live in is new. It has changed. The dynamics that were at play at the time, and that motivated these countries to come together in that format of South-South cooperation, were beginning to ebb away, and new other poles were emerging in the developing world, especially the Asian tigers, your South Korea, your Taiwan, Hong Kong, Philippines, Malaysia, and so on. And these were a new dynamic in the structure of the global political economy. These countries were powering ahead, were industrializing fast, and their ideological orientation was no longer conforming strictly to that of your southern, the world of the South that existed early on. And so they also were superseded by a new group of countries that emerged, with China accelerating its industrialization after Deng Xiaoping made the famous statement that it is glorious to be rich, and that whether it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it catches the mice, it is a good cat, and was setting out new thinking and making a commitment that China would follow a market-based path to its development. India followed suit in 1991, and in the 90s, these countries, in the mid-90s, it was becoming clear that these countries are the new global powerhouses. And if you look at the BRICS today, which is made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, China and India are some of the major economies with massive markets, countries that are playing a very active role in the hierarchy of global power, in global governance institutions. They are very active in investing outwardly. China in Africa, and India following suit. Countries like Brazil, they have appetite to go to go outwardly, to export, to send, to promote their corporate entities outside of their own countries. So quite clearly, that also brings about a new dynamic in our understanding, or a new thinking in our understanding of South-South cooperation, because it's no longer just strictly about it no longer follows an oppositional format, but more cooperative format, cutting across different kinds of countries, both those, at one level, those countries that were part of the South back in the days, but also the countries that are seen or regarded as emerging markets, as well as, of course, to reconstitute relations between the North and the South on entirely different terms than was the case back then. Well, I think, in my view, what accounts for that shift, one is the end of the Cold War. That's the first. The second has to do with the emergence of a new group of countries that are seen as constituting new growth poles in the world economy. The third, of course, has to do with what is often referred to as declinism, the declining authority of the traditional leaders in the global political economy, and in this instance, we're talking about the U.S. and the fact that it can no longer shoulder the burdens of global governance on its own. It did well in underwriting the existing global governance structures post World War II, and in helping with the formation of entities such as the World Bank, the IMF, supporting NATO, and so on. But that has been superseded by events, and The set of new countries that have emerged more recently have made it possible to look at just one growth pole as, as the only focal point for the world. And these countries that are emerging are confident. They are making very strong assertions in global governance institutions, in the World Trade Organization, especially in the context of the Doha round of multilateral trade negotiations. In the World Bank, in the World Bank and the IMF, they pushing for greater stake in decision making, and more crucially, and this is an area that is not well, or rather where attention is not focused a lot. That in these countries you have entities, commercial entities that have gained confidence and that are viewing themselves as global commercial players outside their own the home country or the home market, and they are buying up assets all over the world. Tata purchased Land Rover and Hummer, I think. The Geely in China purchased Volvo, and gobbling up known brands around the world as part of as part of their expansion strategy, as part of their brand expansion strategy, and to gain technology to move into new markets. That dimension is not well researched in literature about South-South. And of course, the example that I gave earlier on at the seminar about of Synergy, which is a joint venture between Tata Power and Exxaro to widen footprint in the African market. All of that have shifted the way in which we understand South-South cooperation. It is used interchangeably with reference to the BRICS and others, but strictly speaking, the BRICS is not a South-South cooperation arrangement, because you have the countries such as Russia that are aspiring to become OECD members, and that were not in the first place part of the South, if you look at the South traditionally. So there is no point where Russia became part of the South, as it were. So, and it doesn't regard itself as part of the South. It doesn't even regard itself as part of the emerging powers or emerging markets. It doesn't see itself as emerging, perhaps re-emerging. China, there are debates about whether China, given the size of its economy, given its weight in global economy, given its stature in the United Nations Security Council, and given its commercial muscle, trade and investment, and the fact that it is a lender to the United States of America through the purchase of U.S. Treasury bills. So there is a debate about whether China, strictly speaking, is forms part of the South. So, in my view, these countries are aspiring countries, the members of the BRICS, are emerging markets at best, and seek to explore possibilities to deepen trade and investment relations amongst each other, to identify concrete projects around which to cooperate for commercial benefit, to change terms of power relations with respect to international financial institutions through increased representation, enhanced voice in those mechanisms. And they are certainly active in the G20, which is a global economic governance mechanism.